So you've met somebody, and let's just say if you have their birth information, it would be so easy to just go on the internet, put in all the birth data, and then check out the astro compatibility of the two of you. Now the question is that actually effective? Now today we are going to be examining why is it that some of these astro-perfect partners don't really quite work out. And is it possible that the internet sometimes makes it like kind of easy for people to just go check out the compatibility, but it's not really addressing the factors that really lead to effective and rewarding relationships? So I'm going to start off first with looking at some of the techniques that I see very often on most of these websites. And why is it that sometimes it gives you kind of like a superficial idea that kind of misleads people, and also to give some of our professional suggestions as to what you might want to look at in order to get a clearer idea of what you can expect in a relationship with a person. Now let's start off with the real obvious one, which is the sun signs. So that's the obvious one simply because it's easy, right? I mean, if you are a Sagittarius, you meet somebody, oh, you're born in July and then therefore you're a Cancer. Okay, let's go put it on the internet. Okay, I'm a Sagittarius woman, he's a Cancerian man. Are we a good match? And these websites are ubiquitous. They're all over the place. And of course, I mean, if you happen to be a Sagittarius and you're trying to date a Cancer, let me tell you, the story isn't great if you're on most websites. They're going to tell you that, yeah, you don't really have much in common. But that's not always the case. I mean, I'm sure at some point you're going to find a Sagittarius and a Cancer in a perfectly happy and rewarding relationship. So how does this work? So one of the biggest fallacies here is that sun signs alone would be able to determine whether or not people are going to be a good match. And one of the things that tends to be most common is that you want to find somebody who is the same element as you. So if you happen to be an earth sign, for example, then the conventional wisdom is that you want to go be with another earth sign. But let me show you some real life examples where this doesn't quite play out. And you're going to see some patterns here. So my first example is Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. So Barack Obama is a Leo, and that's pretty obvious because, you know, he's this warm, shining sort of personality. He's popular with people and natural president of the United States. But his wife, though, Michelle Obama, is a Capricorn. And she looks like it, you know. Of course, she's like the first lady or ex-first lady. But if I were to tell you she was a CEO of a company, but she looks the part, and you definitely know that she doesn't look like somebody you want to go mess with. You know, she's going to stare at you if you don't behave yourself. So you find that there is on most websites you will find that Leo and Capricorn are not usually described as being like the perfect partnership because they're very different. One is very childlike, the other is kind of like a school mistress, if you know what I mean, right? But at the same time, if you look at Barack and Michelle Obama, those dynamics are present, but it doesn't really stop them from being an effective couple. And that's not to say that they agree on everything. It's kind of pretty obvious that because of their difference in personalities, they're probably not going to agree on anything, but that's not what a great relationship makes. Now, I'm going to give you another example is of a famous person in Singapore, where I'm from, and his name is Lee Kuan Yew. So the founder of modern Singapore is a Virgo. And if you ask any person who's from Singapore, they're going to tell you, yeah, he's totally a Virgo. Classic, very detail-oriented, down to the minutest of detail, very critical, and uber practical. So that's Lee Kuan Yew for you. Now, his wife is a lady called Kwa Geok Choo, the late Kwa Geok Choo, is a Sagittarius. Now, on most astrology websites, they're going to tell you this is the kiss of death, right? Because Virgo and Sagittarius are signs that are said to be in square with each other. And that means, well, they're going to have arguments, they're going to have disputes, they're going to have very different perspective of the world. And most websites are going to sort of suggest that it's going to be tough, it's going to be difficult. But ask any Singaporean and they will tell you that that's a relationship that has endured. Definitely not an easy one. I don't think anybody expected their marriage to have been an easy one. But at the same time, if you looked at a lot of the interviews that both of them have done over the years where they talked about each other, what comes through is that level of mutual respect that and it was always very clear that although one person sort of like, you know, was in charge of an entire country, it was pretty clear that at home, the dynamics wasn't always that he was in charge, you know? So that's why you want to be a bit skeptical about websites that just purely look at sun signs. And most of you who are watching this video probably have done a little bit of your own study into astrological factors. And sun signs, they're really not everything. The second thing that you will notice is that, again, going on sun signs, is that there are plenty of websites where if you go on it, there's this long page that you can sort of scroll down, and at first it gives you personality traits. Sometimes there are suggestions on what kind of career would be right for you, and there's usually a nice, helpful little section at the bottom where it suggests some of the traits or the kind of partners that you might want to look for. So if you happen to be, say, a Capricorn, for example, then they might suggest that, because you're an ambitious career type person, that you may want to look for somebody who cares about their career as well, because then both of you could be like a power couple. So of course, if you're a Capricorn, then that makes sense, right? I mean, if I'm ambitious, that I want to be somebody who's like a high flyer, somebody who wants to move up in society just like the way I am, because logically that would make a great relationship, right? But it doesn't always play out that way. So I'm going to tell you a story about one of my students, this fantastic lady who is at a very high-level executive in a multinational company. So she is very Capricorn. She's got multiple planets in Capricorn. But you see, and she's happily married, and she's undoubtedly a very successful person with a conventional career. Now, her husband was in Singapore, but he didn't really have a job. I mean, he was here in Singapore on what we know as a dependence pass. So he's really here because, his wife is successful. And he spends most of his time at home with their daughter. And she's very grateful for it, because it basically means that while she's at work and doesn't always have time to be at home, he's covering all the duties at home. So it's by no means like a conventional partnership. It sort of subverts the sort of male-female dynamic. But the thing is, you should see her face when she talks about her husband. She glows away. And the husband is exploring lots of things on his own, and she's amazed and that he's had this time to go explore this. So some of you who have studied a bit of astrology will know that sometimes things like other things besides planets and signs are kind of important, because she's got a lot of her planets, Sun and Mars especially. These are male indicators in a woman's chart. She's actually got them in the 4th house, which is typically associated with things like home and family, which actually explains why it's very acceptable for her to imagine that there's this man who she experiences as being in the realm of home and family, being a good father, being able to run a household, is something that she appreciates very much, without her actually sacrificing or compromising her identity as a Capricorn, because she's ambitious, she's career-oriented, completely fits. And so that's why I would be very skeptical about websites that sort of purport to sort of recommend what kind of partner you should have on the basis of, okay, you're a Gemini or you're an Aquarius and therefore you should have such a partner. I would be very, very skeptical of that. Now, next is, let's take a deep dive into another 2 planets that seem to sort of dominate this conversation about love and sex and romance, which are Venus and Mars. Now, I know it's pretty logical and obvious why those 2 planets come into play, because they are, after all, the planets of love, sex, and romance, right? Of course, and Venus and Mars are also like the feminine and the masculine planets. So when you find that lots of websites sort of tell you that, okay, Venus and Mars are really instrumental in determining things like your romantic taste and your sexual taste. Now, I'm not disputing that. Those are absolutely correct. But however, what I'm addressing here is that the disproportionate importance that they take when we talk about compatibility. Now, of course, if you're 15 or 16 years old, or if you are not really looking for like a long-term partner, you're looking for a hookup, or you're looking for somebody that you can sort of fantasize about on your own, then yeah, of course, Venus and Mars are going to be essential, because it does describe that basic attraction that people have for each other, which is pretty biological in nature. I mean, you either find somebody like really sexy or you don't, right? Now, the problem is that Venus and Mars don't usually make for a good long-term relationship. It might describe like a fantastic bedroom experience, but you'll find that actually with most with a lot of happy couples that have been together for a long time and in rewarding relationships, you'll find often that when you put their charts together, they don't always have like the best Venus and Mars sort of combination, which actually, if you also interview these people, they're going to sort of, especially if they're a bit on the older side and they've been together for a long time, they're going to laugh and smile and go like, like the stuff that happens in the bedroom is not everything in a relationship. And that means that if you happen to be in a space where you're looking for a more mature, sort of settled down relationship, you'll find that Venus and Mars, conversely, can actually create quite a bit of problems actually, because first of all, you might get a relationship that's very sort of centered on physical characteristics, and we all know that the physical beauty doesn't last forever. And also on top of that, Venus and Mars can actually produce a bit of like a hedonistic streak to the relationship, where it's all about having a good time. It's all about whether or not we've got that spark in the relationship, which is nice to have at the beginning. But good times, they're not always there in a relationship, and sometimes Venus and Mars can actually reduce the ability of people to be able to sort of like weather out the tough times, when there are financial problems, when there are kid problems, when there are parent problems, when people get sick and things like that. So you'll find that sometimes Venus and Mars can really hinder like a mature and settled relationship. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, that a little bit of attraction in a relationship goes a really long way. And it helps, like even if you're in your 70s, to sort of look across the table and feel like, oh my God, like my husband, he's so hot, right? Even though he's 70. That's always nice to have, but I wouldn't put a disproportionate importance on Venus and Mars. And of course, on the other hand, we also want to look at the planets that don't get enough attention. And here's where we get into kind of like unsexy territory, because Venus and Mars were the sexy territory. So the two planets that I think don't quite get enough attention are Moon and Mercury. Let's start first with the Moon, because if you think about most sort of like settled down relationships, whether or not you have kids, don't have kids, whether you sort of have a conventional sort of domestic setup, but the thing about the Moon is that it really describes how you are like on a day-on-day basis. And frankly, if you look at most settled relationships, even if you don't like marry, even if you just sort of like be together, but it's really unsexy. Most married life or relationship life, after a while, it's about, toilet paper, it's about bed sheets, it's about like, what do you want to eat for dinner? So it's a very day-on-day, daily life sort of thing. And another major role that settled relationships tend to play for most mature adults is that your partner is the source of emotional stability. So what's even more important than sexual and romantic compatibility is really, if you're having a hard time, are you able to sort of go home and know that your partner is going to be there for you, that they're going to kind of get what you are feeling or what you are thinking for the day? Is it okay for you to sort of like be down for a while, and then your partner just sort of takes it in their stride, and they understand instinctively whether you need to talk, whether you would like to eat something nice, or whether you just want to be left alone, So the Moon is so underrated in relationships, and it's not just about people being like very emo with each other. That actually is not necessarily very healthy, but it's more like knowing that there's going to be a support, that you are going home to a partner. Now, the other planet that is super underrated is Mercury, which is the planet of communication and thinking. So that's another fundamental thing that's super unsexy. But if you have a life with somebody, you kind of do need to have conversations, and everything from sharing a joke and personal inside joke to having tough conversations about money and what we're going to do about your mother who's like kind of getting sick and senile right now. So these are real conversations that people have, and we want to make sure that people are like on the same page. And that is so underrated, that especially when you look at when couples sort of break down, the moment that they can't talk to each other anymore, or if they say things like, okay, I could explain it to my partner, but I don't think they're going to get it, that sometimes is a bit like a death knell in a relationship, when people can no longer communicate with each other. So yeah, Moon and Mercury, like you just don't really find those on most internet websites when they talk about compatibility, if you know what I mean, right? Now, there are two other planets that I also think are really important in relationships based on my experience. And these two are even worse than Moon and Mercury. They literally never show up on like any kind of websites that discuss romantic compatibility, and they are like seriously unsexy, okay? So these two planets are Jupiter and Saturn. Now, Jupiter is a planet that determines things like a person's beliefs, their principles, their ethical spectrum that they operate on. So there are some people who really have strong views on things like religion or whether something is ethically correct or not, whether it's acceptable. And some people kind of have like a looser definition of what's okay and what's not okay. So, and you'll find that the compatibility when it comes to Jupiter is really important, okay? Because I've lost count of the number of sort of like real life relationships that break down because of things like religious beliefs. So perhaps one person's decided to sort of adopt a particular religion, and the other party is like, yeah, I'm having none of this. And that can really drive a wedge into relationships. People break up and people get divorced because of things like that. And it's a lot more than just religion. It's also things like maybe the husband's just done something in his job, which his wife thinks is not okay. It doesn't fit in with my ethical boundaries. I think you should own up and go say sorry to people that you've hurt. And the husband goes like, yeah, I did this, but that's my problem. I'm not saying sorry to these people, for example. And by the way, I'm talking about a real case that I have actually dealt with as a professional. So what happens is that when two parties have a very wide divergence in their ethical beliefs, that's like a deal breaker. It doesn't really matter how good the sex is or whether their families get along with each other. If these two people can't decide on what's right and what's wrong, it's game over, bro. Right, so that's Jupiter, super unsexy, but really important. Now, the other one is Saturn, probably the most unsexy planet among all of the 10 planets. But Saturn also deals with things like stability, discipline, and maturity. And maturity essentially means doing things that you don't like because it's your responsibility to do so, or because, we just kind of need to get the job done, right? So it means that you kind of have to buckle down, put your nose to the grindstone, and do what you have to do. So the thing about most marriages and relationships is you kind of want things to last. And when things last, life isn't always like fine and dandy. So Saturn is also where people are sort of willing to put their own needs and desires aside so that they can sort of make things good. So Saturn, in how it interacts with when you put two charts together, is so essentially important. And I've seen so many times where the couple looks great, they're young, they're experimental, they want to travel, they have the same hobbies, but where the Saturn isn't strong between the two charts, and that's when I start to see that once they decide that, okay, we want to get married, and once, you find that both parties have to make some compromises when it comes to things like finances, when you've got responsibilities like paying for a home or making, both sides' parents happy. And then you find that the lack of that Saturnian interaction between them essentially means that people go like, okay, you mean what, the good times are over, but we want to spend all our money on holidays, and now what, we have to pay for this home because my partner wants like a bigger home. And that's where you start to see that when times aren't great, and then this lack of Saturn just means that the maturity just isn't always there. Now, before I go any further, I just want to talk to you about Selfology Academy. So some of you already know that I'm not just a professional astrologer, I also teach astrology. Now, especially in a world where so much of this information on the internet is not always the most reliable. And a lot of these websites, they don't really give you a structured education. So you find that many people who've tried to learn astrology on their own end up looking at a chart and feeling like, okay, I know this terminology, I know that particular word, and I've heard of it, but I don't actually really know how to put it into a chart and to sort of get to know the person of the chart that I'm reading. So if you've been trying to learn astrology on your own and you're looking for a good foundational course, you might want to check out the links in the description below and find out how you can get involved in a proper astrology education. But before we end off, I just want to share one short theory about why I think some of these websites, they don't really work. It's because it works on a basic theory that we are looking for like harmony. Because it comes from the idea that if I'm going to be in a relationship, I want to be with somebody who sort of like fits in perfectly like a jigsaw puzzle piece into what I need. So they've got to like what I like. And if I'm like a grounded person, you've got to be a grounded person just like me. So one of the problems here is that it's not always the most mature view on relationships. Like I said, it works if you're 15 and you're just sort of looking for like a nice romance. But if you're looking for like an enduring, settled down relationship, you'll find that actually sometimes the best relationships have a bit more of like a superficial difference between them. So you could have somebody who's like super talkative and then their partner is really quiet, or you have somebody who's like a kind of like an outgoing extroverted party sort of person, and then the other person just wants to sit at home and read a book or something. So apart from all these superficial differences in preferences and their hobbies and things like that, you'll find that some of the things that I mentioned earlier, like the ability to sort of connect with each other emotionally, to have the same ethical beliefs, now those are the backbone of a relationship that keeps people together. And you'll find that most more superficial type of websites tend to focus on things that aren't really that important, like having the same hobbies and things like that. Lots of couples have different hobbies, and they stay together and they're very in love with each other. In fact, what I want to also mention is that when you look at couples who are really happy, you realize that when you talk about the sections where they sort of align with each other, the mood is usually like, yeah, it's calm, like we wanted a home that was like this, and the other couple goes like, yeah, we wanted a home that was like that. And you can see that's where they agree. Now, notice what happens when they talk about things where they differ. So if one party is a bit of a risk taker, they're on holiday and somebody just went and sort of jumped off a cliff into the water. And you'll find that the introverted person might go like, yeah, I cannot believe that my wife just went and did that. And on one hand, you can see the eye rolling and whatever, but if you look carefully, there's the grinning. There's this feeling of like, what is this creature, this strange creature who is doing things that I probably wouldn't do myself? But at the same time, if you ask this person, they would say that had it not been for my wife and her, indomitable spirit, I would never have been sort of introduced to this world where people live life with fire and with spirit. And so what I'm trying to explain here is that when you look at relationships, now if you are going online and trying to sort of assess a relationship, a lot of it comes from a different space of gratitude for the person that your partner is. So you'll find that it's not really, when we talk about compromise, it's not about changing yourself to sort of conform to another person, but rather most of us want to be loved for who we are, which is why astrology and the learning of it is really understanding who we are, because how are we going to love that person if we don't know who we are? But at the same time also to realize that it's when we want to be loved for who we are, but loving another person is also loving them for who they are, for whatever it is that their personality is like. So if you enjoy more of these videos like this, where I discuss astrological concepts, but also applying them to real life, and so that we can actually use astrology besides being just a hobby and something that's interesting with trivia pieces. Now, if you like more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me what other sort of techniques that you've seen on the internet that you've tried and it didn't really work, and then you can just sort of put in the comments there and maybe we can have a nice discussion about it. So until the next video, see you guys.